we see the trend definitely happening that more and more companies turn their attention into yard management, given the fact that it is so important and that it is also the linkage between the transportation and shipping process on the one side and the warehousing and production manufacturing process on the other side. So if this link, even if it's not as big in the overall end-to-end process, but if it's that this link doesn't work 100% or creates a bottleneck, you can optimize your transportation as much as you want. You can optimize your warehouse production as much as you want. But if something in the middle doesn't work, the end-to-end process doesn't work.
Hello, and welcome to Speaking of Supply Chain, where we explore trends, current events, and innovations impacting the logistics and supply chain industries. I'm your host, Ellen Wood. In the digital age, there seems to be a management system for every aspect of logistics. WMS, TMS, LMS, and the most recent addition to this lexicon is YMS. The yard is often the unsung hero of supply chain operations. It's where the rubber meets the road, literally. Today, we're diving into the world of yard management with my guests, Michael Agustin and Matthias Platzer, and from Westernacher, and we're going to talk more about yard management. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us.
So I am really looking forward to this conversation. It sounds like it's going to be really interesting. But first, let's do our icebreaker. And the question you guys selected was, what is your favorite smell and what memories does it evoke? Michael, do you want to go first?
Absolutely. So it's an interesting icebreaker question, I have to say. So my favorite smell is the smell of freshly cut grass or lawn right in the morning when it's still a little bit damp. Reason being, when I was younger, I played a lot of football, or in the US you would say soccer, and there's no smell that beats that on a Saturday or Sunday morning when you come on the pitch and you smell that. So that's absolutely great and gets a lot of memories back. Unfortunately, I now live in Phoenix. I live in the desert, so there's not a lot of grass here.
No grass
from time
to cut.
time, I still get that smell.
What about you, Matthias?
Yeah, my favorite smell actually is the smell of a fresh barbecue. Yeah, so the smoke of the barbecue. Not only is it a memory of countless hours of good food and having fun with friends and family, but also it reminds me of steam engines and the railway itself is actually why I got into logistics, into this industry.
Interesting. So I have had this question before and I answered it on another episode, but I've picked a different smell for today. And today the smell that is one of my favorite smells is the smell of freshly brewed coffee. And I think everyone kind of loves that smell a little bit. I was listening to a radio show yesterday, and there was one of the hosts of the radio show was saying he loves the smell of coffee, but he can't stand the taste of it. So he brews a cup of coffee every morning and has it brewing in his house just so he can smell it, and then he dumps it out. Which I thought was silly. I thought at least, take the cup of coffee and give it to someone, at work or something like that. But no, he likes the smell and that's it, not the taste. I also like the taste of coffee, so I drink mine in the morning. But the smell of coffee is just, Michael, I prefer it to grass in terms of trying to wake up.
Mm-hmm.
But I do love this.
Anyone who works in logistics is used to the smell of coffee, and it's definitely very close to the smell of grass or barbecue, as Matthias said.
It is a very distinctive smell. I like this question. So what is it that Westernacher does? For any of our listeners out there that may have not heard the name, what is it that Westernacher does?
So especially in the English-speaking countries, it's a very hard name to pronounce because, as you might tell by our name, we are a German-based company, Westernacher Consulting. So what we do is we are an SAP implementation partner that is focusing around digital supply chain and digital transformation using latest SAP technology. And in context of that and context of the digital supply chain, we are also heavily engaged in the supply chain execution space, which mainly involves transportation, warehousing, and the topic that we are talking about today, which is yard management and yard operation. So my name is Michael Agustin. I am a managing partner here at Westernacher Consulting, the global practice director for our yard logistics practice. So for now almost 7 years, I'm mainly dealing with yard processes and how customers can optimize their yard operations.
I'm Matthias Platzer. I'm the practice director for yard logistics in Europe from Westernacher. I deal with yard management software and yard management for over 10 years now, so all my professional life, to be honest.
All right, so let's get into our topic today, which is yard management. And um, it seems so intuitive or second nature, and maybe that's just because I've been in the supply chain industry for long enough now that everything just kind of sounds logical. Like, why wouldn't you have this? But this isn't something that every operation is utilizing to help organize the work that they have in their facilities and in their campuses. So what is the holdup? Why would organizations not have this in place in this digital age where all of our information and all of our processes are to a point of being managed by a software? What would be the reason that companies are holding off on managing their yard operations?
It's a good question, and I think that you partially already given the answer to yourself by your introduction. So it's part of the supply chain story, the yard management aspect of it. But to be honest, it's a smaller part of it, and there are other parts that are at first, when you look at it on paper, more important and more pressing, namely transportation and warehousing, but also, of course, other aspects. But still, in the end of the day, what I think we in the industry see, but also what our customers are seeing, is that everything is getting more and more connected, more and more closer to each other. 10 years ago, you would implement or you would optimize your warehouse operation, you would optimize your transportation operation, and you would leave it there and basically run in a more siloed fashion. Whereas nowadays, everything comes so much more together in terms of the processes, how they integrate, how they handshake. And this is where a lot of customers, a lot of people in the industry start to identify, okay, there is something missing if we are only talking about transportation, only talking about warehousing and production. And that is the yard. So we see the trend definitely happening that more and more companies turn their attention into yard management, given the fact that it is so important and that it is also the linkage between the transportation and shipping process on the one side and the warehousing and production manufacturing process on the other side. So if this link, even if it's not as big in the overall end-to-end process, but if it's that this link doesn't work 100% or creates a bottleneck, you can optimize your transportation as much as you want. You can optimize your warehouse production as much as you want. But if something in the middle doesn't work, the end-to-end process doesn't work. And that's where a lot of attention now grows around this topic.
Well, and I think that's probably why I'm having trouble wrapping my brain around it, because the transportation management and then, of course, the warehouse management, they are completely dependent on that interim section, which is getting the goods out of the transportation and into the facility. So to me, it's a no-brainer. I'm glad you're here to help our listeners understand that the crucial role that it plays. So if we're talking about that potential disruption of, goods not being where they need to be at that time, like how does the yard management, I mean, other than the obvious of knowing where the goods are, but in terms of resilience and planning and mitigating some of those other potential disruptions?
So basically, what we have seen over the last years, talking about supply chain resilience, basically everything started 5 years ago with a global pandemic. Then we had things going around like the Suez Canal crisis. So supply chains are under major stress all the time. Yeah? What has definitely changed in focus is that a couple of years ago, no one was really that concerned about supply chain. Nowadays, or back in the days that I've mentioned, everyone was all of a sudden talking about supply chain, because in the end of the day, you will notice when you are going into a grocery store and all of a sudden something is missing or something is missing for your production. This is when you notice that you have a problem in your supply chain. Problem is, it's too late at that point of time. So in terms of how you can mitigate these impacts that I've just mentioned, It's of course always the end-to-end picture, and as I've already mentioned, the end-to-end picture when we are talking about supply chain and logistics is not only transportation and warehousing. There are multiple components that come together. Yard is being one of those components, and that example is the example is very easy. Yeah? If you're looking at industries that are producing just in sequence, yeah, it is crucial that you have a very, very constant and planned flow of goods into your production line. For that, the last thing that you want to happen is bottlenecks at the gate, for example, where the truck driver has to wait 30 minutes until they can enter the premises, or you don't want basically some kind of goods arriving into your warehouse too late or too early. So you need to give them a time when they are basically expected to arrive. So these are things that are necessary for a seamless supply chain execution that also increase the resilience of your supply chain, because it gives you a lot of visibility at the end of the day. You know upfront if something goes wrong. From a yard and warehousing perspective, if you actually track these processes and if you maintain these processes correctly, rather than flying blind and basically not knowing when what is going to arrive, or simply losing time in the entire process itself.
So what would be the strategy behind managing all of that equipment, those goods, and just all the other uncertainties that can come up in that transportation process? Matthias?
Yeah, as already mentioned by Michael, uncertainties in the supply chain would be whether you get your supply or you don't get the supply. Yeah. In perspective of the yard, this means there's either an incoming cargo or an incoming means of transportation, or there would be an outgoing cargo or outgoing means of transportation. And the uncertainty is you would never know when a certain cargo is due to arrive. So the strategy is to manage this influx of cargo. You need to plan beforehand. You need to have like a forecast to see when is cargo due to arrive at your warehouse, at your yard, and when it is due to leave your warehouse or your yard again. And this is also, I'm taking here in parallel, the warehouse and the yard. It's very important not only to focus on the stock levels in the warehouse, but you also need to take into account the stock levels of cargo in your yard. So a lot of cargo is temporarily stored within the yard, and you need to have this in your overall picture. And the strategy here is actually to smoothen the peak times throughout the day. So the idea is that you have an available capacity of equipment, of workers in the yard, but this should be smoothened throughout the day, so you don't have your peak times, and you don't need an excessive amount of workforce, for example, and you don't need to react to a major influx of incoming traffic and so on. So the idea is to have this integrated forecast to steer the incoming trucks or rail cars, etc., to just smoothen your total yard utilization throughout the day.
So really, this is just a matter of holistic supply chain execution when it comes to the needs of the facility, the production facility, the storage warehousing. When it comes to the transportation, there needs to be that connection that knows when the transportation's coming in, what the warehouse has the capacity to hold, and all of the in-between movement that is taking place between those two. So, is there anything... Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. So, Michael, can you tell us a little bit more about the role of that importance? I mean, because to me, it sounds absolutely critical that all of this happens in the order that it needs to happen, in the time frames that it needs to happen, when it comes to labor, when it comes to everything that Matthias was just saying. This is critical for especially larger production facilities that need to have their campus, I would say, in functioning daily.
Absolutely, it's mission critical in the end of the day that all of these components work hand in hand together. And luckily, us as a consulting company, we have the privilege of talking to a lot of customers from a lot of different industries. So we are not only exclusively talking about a trend that comes from one specific angle or viewpoint, but what we are getting talking to our customers, and it doesn't matter which industry we are talking to or which customers, more and more we are seeing the trend towards holistic supply chain execution. So this really talks about the logistics process, no matter whether you're a shipper, manufacturer, whether you're a logistics service provider. But that's basically what a lot of customers are driven nowadays. Whereas in the past, as I've already mentioned, these kind of operations used to be siloed. So why we are seeing this is very, very simple. Number one, it's a market trend as well. Yeah. So if I'm producing something and I'm sending this to my customers, I have a request from my customer to update my customer anytime about the status of the shipment, no matter whether it's in transportation, no matter whether it's sitting in the yard and waiting to be picked up, no matter whether it's still in the warehouse. But there is an increased demand across all the stakeholders in the supply chain to provide visibility. So talking about the yard, it is very, very crucial to always know, if I'm talking about a trailer that is sitting in my yard, what is on that trailer? How long has it been sitting on that in that yard? Which orders are on that trailer? Is there an order that has priority because it's sitting on there too long or it's already missed the date? These are all crucial information in order to steer my entire process in the end of the day. If I'm not seeing this information, I'm not able to drive transportation or warehousing on the other side as efficiently as I want to. And this is exactly what we are seeing. And the second thing is, and I'm sure we are going to talk about this later as well, is of course also the technology aspect of it. So nowadays, with the technologies that are available in the market, and the enterprise software that is available in the market, you can integrate all of your supply chain processes, have these processes talk to each other, have them exchange data, increase that visibility so that when I'm in transportation or when I'm actually in transportation planning, and I already know, okay, in 7 days and 14 days, this is what comes into my yard. And based on this, I can already determine this is the amount of trailers I need, or if I'm operating rail cars in my yard, this is the amount of rail cars I need, and with that, the amount of movements that I need to perform in order to basically meet those requirements. So you see, it's all connected in the end of the day. What we are seeing especially over the last 5 years, is going from a siloed approach where you would do your transportation, you would do your yard, you would do your warehousing. Everything gets more and more connected to really create this holistic supply chain, being able to optimize the entire process, because number one, it's mission critical, as we have already mentioned. But number two, this is also where you can get hold on, need to restart. This is also where you can get a competitive advantage in your supply chain towards your customers, but also towards your suppliers, if your supply chain is up and running versus if you are having any issues here.
Well, and you mentioned technology, and one other way, excuse me. Let me start that over. You mentioned technology, and one of the other technologies that we've been talking about here on the podcast with a number of different guests are, autonomous vehicles and e-vehicles, or, other types of technology. Are those able to be incorporated into this yard management as well? When there's not a person guiding this AGV or this other vehicle moving goods throughout the facility?
I think actually we then need to answer this in two different. Yeah. So when we are talking about AGVs, they would have been around for years now. So AGVs are, I think I'm thinking back to my university courses. We already saw the examples back in the days, 20 years ago, about AGVs in container terminals. So the most known examples would be the Port of Los Angeles or the Port of Hamburg. And as we speak, these AGVs are often used in container terminals. Yeah. So at the moment, I can only think of examples of container terminals here. So if anybody out there would have a different example that AGVs in yards are used for other cargo than for containers, just reach out to me. I really want to know about this. But yeah, the AGVs, yeah, they of course need a management system in the background. They need to have the route guidance. They need to have the requests and their orders sent to them. So everything is system driven. Everything is system driven for HGVs. HGVs are a great opportunity to automate and to optimize your processes. Just think of the safety distance between two transportation equipments in the yard. So when manually driven, you need, of course, a longer distance in between, just in case of exceptions of braking, etc. With HGVs, you can reduce this these safety distances between the two vehicles moving on the yard. When talking about then the yard design, when using HGVs in your yard, HGVs normally operate in enclosed areas, so there is just the HGV movements in this area. So there is no combination between manually driven trucks and these automated guided vehicles. And this is what we saw in the last couple of years with autonomous driving taking over, not only in the yards, but also on the streets. Yeah, we now have a combination of this. So there are the first projects out there. There are the first startups out there for autonomously shunted trailers with little shunters, yeah, that are, of course, electronically powered, but also autonomous driving. Also, system driven by a yard management system. The yard management system also gives the requests, the from location, the to location, the orders, what to do, what to move from which area of the yard to which location in the yard and so on. But with this new technology, with autonomous driven shunters, with autonomous shunters, we would actually have a combination there. So we can use them in open areas of the yard. So just as an example, an external truck driver could come into the yard, would move his or her external truck around in the yard, but still in between there would be the shunters autonomously driven by the system, shunting their internal yard movements between the areas of the yard. This is actually the latest trend in technology. We've seen this now for a couple of years, and the first startups are actually working on this optimization potential for yards.
How is the adoption rate of YMS? I mean, is it increasing? Is it optimizing the role in yard that was terrible. How is the adoption rate of YMS going? I mean, it has lots of roles in the supply chain, optimizing yard operations, obviously, but there's the visibility issue, there's the cost issue. You know, how many companies, how many facilities, how many campuses are actually utilizing this technology to their benefit?
I can't give you an exact number on this, but we of course see an increasing number of companies, where yard management gets into focus. Why? Just imagine we have visibility in warehouses for years now. We have automated warehouses. Everything is fine in the warehouse. We have our KPIs. We do optimization there. We have perfectly functioning transportation routes now. We also we also see supply chain networks where transportation is working fine. We have our systems for this for years now, well established. We have our visibility there. We have our optimization going on there. We have our KPIs. And this is yard management. Just this gap between transportation and warehouse was often overlooked over the last, let's put it like 15 years, 10 years. But since 10 years ago, we see this increasing number of companies that are interested in managing their yard processes. Why? Managing is all about getting control over processes. So without getting control over processes, it's just a blind spot. So for most of the companies, the yard was actually a blind spot where they couldn't react, where they wouldn't even see that there are problems in their hubs, in their campuses, and so on. Yeah. So first of all, they need a system to manage their processes, to get the visibility over their data. Once they collect the data, and once we establish in the yard management, or once we establish in the yards KPIs and reporting and so on, we then identify where are the bottlenecks, where do I need to react, where do I need to control my processes better, or where am I lacking of control over my processes. This is why we see an increasing number of yard management users out there.
And just to add to what Matthias is saying, a yard management system is not Excel. Yeah. So, because I think most of the reality is you go to a customer site and you ask them, how do you manage your process? Because the process exists for years already, as Matthias has said. So it's not like it hasn't been looked at or touched at. But the reality also is that I would say in 8 out of 10 cases where I'm going to a customer that has not implemented a YMS yet, they are using Excel and walkie-talkies. Yeah. And basically, John is yelling at Jake to move a trailer from A to B. Yeah. That is, of course, that is the reality. And this is not a yard management process, which is system driven. And this is exactly where a yard management system comes into place to replace these processes. And then in the end of the day, also optimizes them.
How then are these technologies integrated with the WMS, with the TMS, with all of the hardware, the mechanics on site? How does this really fit into all of those other components of the supply chain management?
So it's very important that you choose a yard management system that, besides the functionalities of yard operations, also offers a variety of options in order to integrate into the supply chain network. So to give you an example, if you're looking at a largely used enterprise software as SAP, for example, is, that comes with a lot of standard integrations that are already existing out of the box between the transportation, warehousing, and yard processes. So if you're running all of this in one common technological layer, it's very easy to connect these processes because you have standard out-of-the-box integration scenarios and processes that you can easily configure, and then you're up and running. And then you're actually also seeing the benefits that we have already talked about in terms of visibility, in terms of having all these processes talking to each other, and also the mandatory handshakes. But of course, there are also scenarios where a yard management system that you're implementing has to talk to a variety of other systems. It could be that on the transportation side, I'm using system A, whereas on the warehousing side, I'm using system B from 2 separate suppliers. In that case, it is always important that you choose a system that offers open integration technologies so that you can easily integrate your yard management system into these areas. Because in the end of the day, we have already touched upon the siloed operation. Yeah, if you do not integrate all of these components and make them talk to each other, yes, you might be able to digitize your processes, which is already a benefit, but the true benefit that you want to see comes out of the integration. And for that, it is very important to not just choose any solution that is out in the market from a yard management perspective, but that you choose the system that fits into your supply chain, that ideally already uses and is built on technology that you are using already. Could be, for example, in the case that I've already mentioned, if you're using SAP today, it makes sense to look into an SAP product rather than a third-party product because it makes life easier at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. That's true. So as we're talking more about, making life easier for these companies, one of the major struggles that companies are facing right now is labor and workforce management and having available labor. So, what does this do to the needs of the organization when it comes to the yard workers that are already there who are operating? There's a number of different roles. I can't imagine that this is going to replace jobs? Because as you said, this is something that they've been doing. This is just more visibility into the impact that it has on both sides of the equation. But reducing the manual labor effort, we were talking about AGVs a moment ago, and not having manually operated vehicles. What other efficiencies would a YMS have for that aspect of the supply chain operations?
Yeah, so first things first is it's definitely not about reducing the headcount that is involved in that process. Yeah? So implementing a yard management system in order to digitize the process, potentially automate the process, is not about getting people rid of people. Yeah? It is more about asking yourselves two questions. Number one is, how can I make the life of these guys easier? And as you have already heard throughout our conversation, we are talking about a process here that might not be as complex, but which is nowadays managed in Excel spreadsheets and people talking to each other, trying to manage the process ad hoc as it happens. So this is a very cumbersome way of working. And it is also a very complex way of working because you are not basically guided through the process. So how can I make the life of my workers and my staff easier? And how can I make the process more efficient? Because rather than having one person sitting all day long at the gatehouse doing nothing else than making sure that whoever comes is on time, comes with the right cargo on it, is the right person that I'm expecting, maybe it makes more sense to facilitate that process and have him do something else at the gate. Yeah. So instead of registering drivers all day long, maybe it makes more sense for this person to, in the future, look at the condition of the trucks and trailers going in. So are they damaged? Doing a thorough inspection to make sure that also on that end I'm reducing cost. Because one thing that always happens, or happens quite a lot, is that all of a sudden you're getting an email from a carrier who says, hey, my trailer got damaged while it has been on your yard. And if you do not have proof of that, well, guess who has to pay for it? So these are things that you have to look at. Yeah. So how can I make the life easier of my staff? And what is it that these guys can do for me in that process that adds more value rather than just spending time on activities that can also be done by a system-driven approach? And then of course, also one thing that we always need to look into is the training and upskilling aspect of it. Because especially with people that are not used to work on a system, and that pretty much applies to anyone who's not having an office desk job, who sits in front of a desk all day long, but who's outside in the field and actually executing the process, it is very important that we also view their activities from a perspective that these guys are not skilled in using a system. So we need time in order to upskill them, in order to train them on that new process, but in order to also take them by the hand and explain them, why are we doing certain things differently now? What is going to be the impact of that? What is going to be the benefit of you doing this going forward? So it also has a lot to do with change management in that sense, because we are expecting people who, as I've said, worked for numerous years, and it could be sometimes even 20, 30 years that these people are working there, in Excel spreadsheets, walkie-talkies, kind of managing their life day in, day out. Then we come in there with a yard management implementation and with a system-driven approach. There's a huge gap that needs to be closed, and that also needs to be accounted for when doing these projects.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that change management is critical when it comes to upskilling a labor force that may be resistant to that particular change. But you bring up another excellent point when you talk about, these aren't people who sit at desks all day. They are out in the yard, in the elements. They are around lots of moving vehicles, and there's a lot of traffic taking place. So what are some impacts or some safety impacts that this will have, measures in order to enhance that worker protection out in the field and in the yard?
To take this, we need to focus actually on a certain industry. As you can imagine, there are so many different industries with different types of yards out there with so different safety measures to be taken. We need to focus on the example of a chemical yard. Yeah? In a chemical yard, there would be a lot of safety measures to be taken just in operations, depending on actually the time of the day, of depending on the material that is being loaded or being unloaded, on the type of equipment, which truck is coming here, and also on the role the yard worker is actually performing in this operation. And this is a whole rule book just with safety guidelines, or with safety checks, or with safety procedures to be taken. And this, of course, can be reflected in the system. Why not letting the system work for you? Why not letting the system know what needs to be done? And this is done actually, or reflected by guided procedures for the workers outside. Meaning the workers have system driven a questionnaire, a guided question catalog, a guidance on what they need to do. Yeah, and this is first of all in the happy flow. So if everything goes right and they do their checks before the loading, during the loading, after the loading, and so on, this would be just taken over by the system, and the system actually guides the worker through the operation itself. But this is also then very important when it comes to exceptions. Yeah, whenever there's an exception in in the standard procedure, somebody needs to know what to do, and this can also be taken over by the system again. Yeah, so there's a lot of let's call it business rules that can be defined in a system, that can be taken over by the system just to make life easier of the worker outside. So this is the first way of how the technology can improve the safety measures taken in a yard. But the second approach to this would also be to automate these safety inspections, these safety procedures, that they are not longer done by workers, but directly by a machine. For example, cameras. OCR technology comes to my mind. OCR technology, so optical character recognition, could also help or can also help a lot when it comes to identifying certain trucks or transportation equipment in the yard. It can also help identify damages or irregularities in the pictures and so on. This is what we saw over the last couple of years already, and now AI actually takes over. We can also make use of AI in yard management systems. Yeah, so AI can actually learn countermeasures for exceptions in standard processes. So AI is still something that we need to introduce, yeah, to yard management systems, but I think we will see this in the next couple of years.
Okay. So you were talking about AI, and one of the things that we've touched on a number of times is just the scheduling and that aspect of the management, making sure that things are where they're supposed to be, when they're supposed to be there, flattening out that workload throughout the day so there are less peaks and valleys. So what is really the benefit? I mean, of course there's a benefit. So what's the role of appointment scheduling, if you want to call it that, in improving the turn times for the trucks or reducing congestion? I mean, appointment scheduling seems like such a no-brainer here, but clearly it's rather the cornerstone.
It definitely is, and it is one part of the process which either makes or breaks the entire story here. And I always try to make that comparison when you order a piece of furniture or anything large, which is not Amazon dropping a package in front of your door, but anything large where a truck comes and needs to deliver something at your door, they will also provide you with a time slot. And if that doesn't fit into your schedule, then you are rebooking that time slot because it is mandatory for you to be at home, for example. So you're kind of looking at the same thing, and it's very important. Actually, it's very interesting actually that if when you're standing in front of a yard, you will always see these peak times. So very easy example is in the morning between 8 and 10 a.m. You will have trucks coming or arriving every 30 seconds all of a sudden. Yeah. And then from 10 to 2 p.m. from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. all of a sudden there's no truck arriving. It could be that There's nothing happening. And then all of a sudden, from 2 to 5 in the afternoon, boom, there we go. It's again the same thing. So this is one of the major inefficiencies that we are seeing in terms of yard operations, because you cannot handle that much volume at the time. And then all of a sudden you have, and even if you would account for that, all of a sudden you have such a big drop that there is not a lot for you to do anymore. So it is important that we not only smoothen out the arrivals of trucks and trailers in the yard so that we can kind of deal with that, but it is also very important for us that we ensure I get the right stuff at the right time. So a truck that I need at 10 a.m. in the morning because it has something on it that I need in my warehouse, in my production, is something that I need to prioritize versus a truck that would also arrive at 10, but maybe it's something that has something that is not crucial. It's just dropping an empty trailer or whatever. So I need to tell that guy, okay, come at 11 a.m., for example. And this is where, as you have already mentioned, this is also something where AI can play a role in order to do intelligent appointment scheduling, in terms of suggesting this is what I need at which point in time. But in order to do that, and we are now coming back to that mantra we are talking about here, you need systems in place that talk to each other, that provide that visibility, that hold that data, so that you can make these educated decisions. Otherwise, you end up with what you're having right now, which is basically all the trucks coming in between 8 and 10 in the morning. You have no idea what's on these trucks. You don't know what it is until you open the trailer. And that causes all that efficiency that we nowadays basically see. So, which is why it is very important to have these scheduling processes in place, especially for larger site operations where we are talking about hundreds of trailers and trucks coming in every day, but also on other aspects, where we are dealing with dray cars, containers. It's very important to plan accordingly, because it gives us, when we are talking about yard operations, also the ability to plan our processes. The other thing that we haven't talked about yet, as much as we probably should, is also the topic of cost and cost reduction. And I think it's also a great bridge here tying into that dock appointment scheduling topic, because one of the key levers that you have implementing a yard management system is detention costs. So we are talking about trailers, containers, ray cars, any asset that is sitting in your yard. You cannot have it sitting in your yard forever. So there are obviously contractual obligations how long you can keep these assets in your yard. For that, it is extremely important to plan your entire process. And this is where dock appointment scheduling basically comes into play. If you know that a trailer, a container that comes into your yard, you will actually not touch it for 48 hours because it has no priority. You need to be aware of that, because your time window in order to load or unload that asset and get it out again then becomes smaller. So you might want to accept it early, or you might want to see whether you only accept that trailer or that container at that time when you actually need it. And for that, it is very important to have these processes in place, and also align this with your carriers, because this is the next topic, right? I, as a shipper, or I, as a manufacturer, I can set this up and basically say, okay, I need a time slot, but you need to also talk to your carriers, because your carriers need to be aware. Your carriers might need to be onboarded onto a platform where they are able to book these time slots. There are also contractual obligations with it. So there are a couple of side processes that come with this. But bottom line is, it's very important and very crucial for efficient yard operations.
Well, and you gave the example a minute ago of having a piece of furniture delivered at home and needing to be there during that delivery window, and what kind of difference does this technology make in terms of that real-time information sharing, being able to enhance customer service? Now, I know a lot of times when we're talking about these companies, these customers are not end customers. This isn't a furniture delivery, but this is an internal customer or an interim customer. And, as you were just saying, talking with the transportation companies and the carriers, those could be considered a customer, and coordinating those efforts to improve that business relationship.
So actually, I could answer here with a use case, or to identify actually the tracking and tracing. Um, once again, I had this now several times today already. Tracking and tracing is well established in transportation already. What we get are updates. The shipment is en route. The shipment arrived to a certain hub. The shipment left the certain hub, and so on. Yeah. So you would get status updates with the yard, with the hub in between, but you wouldn't have the visibility. You wouldn't have any updates. What is happening in the yard itself? So what was happening with the shipment? Was it unloaded? Was it inspected? Was it damaged? So this is at the moment again a blind spot. With yard management, you can actually improve this customer service to give updates what is happening directly in the yard. Meaning a certain shipment was now loaded onto a truck, or it was offloaded off a truck. It was inspected by customs, and there was, for example, a finding, so it needs to be blocked for customs at the very point in time. Now, this is what we call also passive tracking and tracing. The next step would be an active tracking and tracing, meaning not only giving you updates on a certain inspection took place, but also giving you options as a customer to react to that. So what should now happen? For example, the shipment was damaged. Should now be a new shipment ordered, or should the shipment be repaired in the yard? So these are actions that can be ordered directly by the customer. This also comes then when a certain connection, for example, wasn't reached in a hub. So a shipment didn't get into the yard on time, so the onward transportation by vessel, by rail car, whatever, was missed, giving you, once again, as customer, giving you the option on reacting to that. Yeah, giving you the possibility to react, to book an alternative transportation, for example, or to book an additional service, and so on and so on. This is the new way of active tracking and tracing.
Now that leaves just one area for us to talk about, and we got into it very briefly when we were discussing, AGVs and electric vehicles and those types of things. But the sustainability and the environmental impact of this. I mean, I can think just off the top of my head, if you've got all of your trucks arriving in that same 2-hour window in the morning, and they're all waiting in line or congested at the gate, there's emissions taking place while they're idling. So obviously, by smoothing out the entire process and having a better scheduling process in place, you're able to reduce the amount of idle time. You're able to reduce even just the amount of drive time by having them only come when it's needed and not just driving around waiting. But what are some other strategies for reducing the carbon emissions and promoting sustainable supply chain activities with the yard management software?
So there are basically a couple of viewpoints that we can take here. One of which is the operational viewpoint. So how can my yard operation help me in reducing carbon emissions and also then potentially reach my sustainability targets? We have talked a lot about the importance of yard management and optimizing the yard process. So if you think about a truck coming in and loading or unloading something, and they are on site for 30 minutes, that truck driver will never turn off his truck. Period. That's what it is. If we can reduce that turnaround time to 20 minutes, then you have basically 10 minutes less on site, which is basically exactly where you're saving on those emissions. The other example from a more operational perspective is if we are talking about operations that involves a lot of shunting. So I'm moving with internal vehicles, I'm moving trailers, or even I'm moving rail cars, I'm moving containers with internal vehicles. The less movements I have to make with these internal vehicles, the less emissions I'm going to produce. So instead of, for example, having an inefficient process, unoptimized process where these internal assets have to do a lot of empty runs because I'm constantly saving them from one side to the other without really having that process planned, optimizing these internal movements to an extent where I'm limiting empty runs as much as I can. This is where I'm not only getting an efficiency increase of my operation and also with that more utilization of those assets, but this is also where obviously I have a reduction in my CO2 emissions. So This is where already operationally, by optimizing our process in the yard, I can reduce a lot of emissions. And then, as already said, of course, from a technological perspective, from a, let's say, more asset-driven perspective, like AGVs, there are, of course, also a lot of things that can be done.
All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen, so much for your time today, for this discussion. I know one of the assets that I downloaded from the Westernacher website was a white paper called "Bridging the Gap: Optimizing Your Supply Network by Introducing Digitized Yard Processes," and it's a great asset. It goes into a lot of detail, and it even goes into some industry specific best practices. So I'm going to make sure that our listeners have access to that link to the website and the white paper in the description of today's episode. And that brings us to the end of this episode. A very special thanks to Matthias and Michael for joining us today and giving us the skinny on yard management. If any of our listeners out there have a suggestion for a topic or would like to be a guest on our show, we'd love to hear from you. You can contact me at podcast@mebach at any time. As always, thank you for listening to Speaking of Supply Chain. If you've enjoyed today's show, please rate and review us on whatever podcast platform you prefer, and be sure to tune in next time.